Okay, let's talk about car prices right now because we know they're still pretty high, especially with the interest rates as high as they are. And if you're in the market for a new or used vehicle, it may be out of reach.
Ford is recalling more than 277,000 trucks.
Big question because you have the aluminum panels now. You've retooled this plant, you're retooling the Kansas City plant.
For nearly half a century, the Ford F-150 has been more than just a truck. It has been an American icon. It represents hard work, family pride, and an unshakable promise of dependability. The slogan, "Built Tough," wasn't just advertising. It was a statement that resonated with generations who depended on their vehicles for work, safety, and identity. But today, that image is under heavy fire. Reports of sudden engine failures, mysterious stalling incidents, and even spontaneous fires have placed Ford's flagship pickup in the national spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The vehicle that once symbolized strength now stands accused of fragility, and the implications reach far beyond Ford's factories. At the center of this unfolding story lies a series of mechanical defects and quality control lapses that have shaken owner confidence. From fractured engine valves to misaligned plugs that can ignite fires, the pattern of failures has raised urgent questions. How did one of America's oldest automakers allow its best-selling product to face such widespread scrutiny? Was this a matter of flawed design, rushed production, or systemic negligence hidden beneath the surface of sleek marketing? In this special report, we investigate how the problem started, why it spread, and what it means for millions of drivers. Each section will unpack a different layer, from the technical breakdowns and safety hazards to the legal, financial, and cultural fallout that followed. This isn't a sensational expose, it's a close look at what happens when trust, built over generations, begins to fracture. Because when the country's most popular truck starts leaving families stranded on highways and dealers overwhelmed with repairs, it becomes more than a company crisis. It becomes a national conversation about accountability, safety, and what tough really means. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. The first signs of trouble surface quietly. Owners reporting strange noises, misfires, and sudden engine stalls on brand new trucks with barely 10,000 miles on the odometer. Within months, the pattern grew unmistakable. The engines weren't just malfunctioning, they were destroying themselves from within. At the heart of the problem was a crucial component: intake valves inside certain six-cylinder EcoBoost engines that could fracture under heat and stress. When a valve snapped, it fell into the combustion chamber, shattering pistons, bending rods, and reducing a sophisticated power plant to scrap in seconds. The technical failure was devastating, but the human impact was even greater. Many of these trucks were family vehicles or job site workhorses purchased through long-term financing. For those buyers, the breakdown wasn't an inconvenience. It was a betrayal. A truck purchased for reliability suddenly became a stranded, smoking reminder of misplaced trust. Some drivers described the failure as sounding like a gunshot beneath the hood, followed by instant silence and the terrifying loss of steering assist and braking power. Others said their trucks simply died mid-drive, forcing them to coast to the shoulder while traffic roared past. Behind the scenes, engineers traced the root cause to metallurgical inconsistencies in the valve manufacturing process. Small deviation in heat treatment, just a few degrees too hot or too long, made the metal brittle. What should have been a durable alloy turned into a weak link capable of snapping under normal operating stress. In mechanical terms, it was a textbook example of how a microscopic flaw can cascade into catastrophic failure. But the larger issue extended beyond metallurgy. It raised questions about quality oversight and supplier accountability. How did thousands of defective valves make it into production engines? Why weren't stress tests catching these weaknesses earlier? Insiders pointed to the pressure of modernization, the drive to retool plants, update models faster, and keep profits ahead of growing electric vehicle investments. When production speed becomes a corporate priority, quality assurance often becomes the first casualty. Ford eventually responded with inspections, extended warranties, and replacements, but the reputational damage had already begun. The failure exposed a deeper vulnerability in the brand's most trusted product line. For owners, it marked the moment when the phrase "built tough" no longer inspired pride. it triggered skepticism. The problem was mechanical, but the consequence was emotional. Once a brand's dependability is questioned, even a flawless repair cannot fully restore confidence. And this was only the beginning. The fractured valves would prove to be the first domino in a chain of mechanical, financial, and cultural crises that would redefine Ford's standing in the automotive world. For decades, the F-150's strength was its dependability. Drivers counted on it to pull trailers, haul loads, and carry families safely across highways. But that trust cracked again when reports began flooding in of trucks that suddenly lost power while moving at full speed. One moment, the engine roared confidently. The next, it went dead silent. The steering stiffened, the brakes grew heavy, and thousands of pounds of steel turned into a rolling hazard. The culprit was a faulty low-pressure fuel pump found in certain late-model trucks. Its job was simple: deliver a steady flow of fuel from the tank to the engine. Yet when it failed, it starved the engine without warning, cutting power instantly. Drivers described the experience as terrifying, comparing it to having the ignition switch turned off in the middle of the interstate. Many were lucky enough to steer to safety, but others narrowly avoided collisions as their vehicles coasted helplessly through fast-moving traffic. For engineers, the mechanical explanation was straightforward. The fuel pump's internal components were prone to premature wear or electronic failure. But for owners, it was another sign that something systemic had gone wrong inside Ford's manufacturing and quality control chain. A vehicle designed for rugged reliability should never fail in such a fundamental way, especially not in a manner that jeopardizes lives. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ford was simultaneously pushing aggressive modernization efforts, transforming factories to produce electric trucks while juggling ongoing quality issues in its gasoline line. Critics within the automotive industry began questioning whether management's attention was stretched too thin, focused on the future, while current drivers were left dealing with dangerous flaws in the present. The public response was swift. Recalls were announced, but fear lingered. Truck owners began posting dashcam footage of their engines dying mid-drive, their experiences shared across forums and social media. The recurring theme was frustration. Repairs took weeks, parts were scarce, and dealers were overwhelmed. For many, it wasn't just a mechanical inconvenience, it was a breakdown of trust. When a vehicle marketed as the safest, most dependable workhorse in America could suddenly stall at 70 miles per hour, the phrase "built tough" began to sound more like an echo than a promise. If engine stalls rattled confidence, the next problem ignited outright fear. Literally, owners began reporting that their trucks were catching fire without warning, sometimes moments after being parked. Photos of charred F-150 sets circulated online, blackened hoods, melted grills, and frames left smoking by the roadside. The source of the problem was alarmingly small, a coin-sized plug designed to seal an oil passage within the engine block. In certain engines, this plug could loosen or misalign during assembly. Once displaced, oil leaked directly onto the engine's scorching hot surfaces, creating the perfect recipe for ignition. A few drops of oil at the wrong temperature were enough to start a blaze. Some drivers smelled burning before they saw flames. Others had no warning at all. Families fled vehicles engulfed in smoke, watching helplessly as their prized trucks turned into torches within minutes. The optics were disastrous. A company that had long marketed its trucks as built tough was now facing headlines describing them as fire hazards. Dealerships scrambled to handle repair requests and inspection calls. Fire departments even issued local advisories in some regions, warning residents to park outdoors until the issue was addressed. Inside Ford, the problem reflected a deeper struggle, one between speed and precision. As production volumes surged to meet demand and new EV investments, line workers and engineers faced tighter schedules and narrower margins for error. Quality assurance teams were under immense pressure to sign off vehicles quickly. A plug just slightly out of tolerance could slip through unnoticed. It wasn't negligence, it was the mechanical cost of rushing an industrial process that once prided itself on meticulousness. For consumers, though, intent didn't matter. The fear of an engine fire turned ownership into anxiety. Households who once boasted about their new F-150 seds now parked them at a distance from their homes, worried that the unthinkable might happen overnight. The defect wasn't widespread compared to total sales, but perception is powerful, and perception was burning fast. This was no longer just a matter of mechanical defects. It was about the collapse of public confidence in a vehicle line once seen as untouchable. If an F-150 could catch fire while parked, what else could go wrong? 3 distinct failures, engine valve fractures, fuel pump stalls and oil plug fires, should have been unrelated, yet to many observers, the pattern was unmistakable. Each represented a different system breaking down, but all pointed to the same underlying issue, a culture strained by haste, pressure and corporate tunnel vision. Inside Ford's plants and offices, the drive to modernize had quietly collided with the reality of maintaining legacy quality standards. Over the past decade, Ford had poured billions into overhauling its product lineup and factories. Aluminum body panels, hybrid systems and fully electric platforms demanded constant adaptation. While the company promoted innovation publicly, insiders described an environment where deadlines trumped caution. Engineers juggled overlapping projects. Suppliers raced to meet new specifications, and production lines were reconfigured at unprecedented speed. In such conditions, oversight can slip, not because workers stop caring, but because systems that once caught errors no longer have time to breathe. Employees from various plants reportedly voiced concerns about increased overtime, staff shortages, and inconsistent testing procedures. Many said morale had shifted from pride in craftsmanship to fatigue under pressure. For decades, Ford's assembly line workers viewed themselves as stewards of a national symbol. But when the focus turned to hitting volume targets and rollout dates, that identity began to erode. The cultural shift was mirrored in management as well. Executives emphasized modernization metrics and quarterly results, while quality departments fought to maintain influence. The result was a widening disconnect between boardroom optimism and factory floor reality. When small defects multiplied into recalls, the company appeared reactive rather than proactive, as if perpetually caught off guard by its own oversight. Publicly, Ford insisted that it was addressing issues decisively, citing new quality control initiatives and supplier audits. Yet the pattern of recurring problems told a different story, a company struggling to reconcile its legacy of toughness with the complexity of modern manufacturing. To outsiders, the question became whether Ford's problems were mechanical or cultural. Were these just a few isolated engineering missteps, or was the entire corporate structure failing to uphold its own principles? Inside the plants, workers knew the answer was not so simple. They weren't just building trucks anymore, they were trying to rebuild faith in a brand that once defined American dependability. For the millions of American households, buying an F-150 wasn't just a purchase, it was a long-term investment in stability. Yet the defects that stranded drivers also stranded their finances. Trucks worth upwards of $50,000 began sitting immobile in driveways and dealership lots, waiting for back-ordered parts and warranty decisions. Loan payments, however, kept arriving right on schedule. Owners who depended on their vehicles for work, contractors, delivery operators, and farmers suddenly faced a double blow: lost income and mounting bills. Some had to rent replacement vehicles just to keep their businesses running, paying hundreds each week on top of existing truck payments. Others watched their credit scores sink as they juggled loans for machines that no longer functioned. The emotional toll was visible in online forums, where lifelong Ford loyalists vented frustration and disbelief at being left paying for a truck that can't move. The cost ripple extended well beyond individual households. Warranty expenses, legal reserves, and recall logistics began to weigh heavily on Ford's balance sheets. Analysts estimated hundreds of millions in potential liabilities, forcing the company to divert funds from new projects into repair programs. Suppliers tied to the F-150 line also felt the pressure. When engines or pumps were recalled, their production schedules were disrupted, leading to layoffs and temporary shutdowns across smaller manufacturing partners. Dealerships bore financial pain of their own. Service bays overflowed with vehicles awaiting diagnostics. Many dealers had to provide loaner cars or temporary transport at their own expense to preserve customer goodwill. Some even absorbed short-term rental costs, just to prevent reputational collapse in their communities. For consumers, the math was simple but brutal. If actually a vehicle marketed as an asset had turned into a liability, depreciation accelerated, resale values plummeted, and insurance companies recalculated premiums for affected model years. What was once a symbol of economic strength became a reminder of fragility, not just mechanical, but financial. The F-150 crisis had revealed something deeper about modern car ownership, that toughness is meaningless if the financial structure beneath it can crumble overnight. The next chapter of this story wouldn't just unfold in garages, it would erupt in showrooms filled with angry customers demanding answers. If Ford's factories were the origin of the problem, its dealerships became the battlefield. Across the country, service departments transformed into triage centers, trucks lined up in long rows behind service bays, their hoods open like silent accusations. Customers who had waited months for delivery now waited weeks for repairs. Some arrived furious, others desperate, but all shared a sense of betrayal. Service advisors, once the friendly faces of the brand, became the front line between corporate policies and human frustration. Many of them had no power to speed up parts shipments or authorize replacements, yet they absorbed the emotional fallout from owners who felt abandoned by the manufacturer. Tempers flared, shouting matches erupted in lobbies. Police were occasionally called to de-escalate confrontations. The problem wasn't just mechanical, it was logistical. The sudden flood of warranty claims overwhelmed dealerships unprepared for the scale of the crisis. Replacement engines, pumps, and electrical modules arrived slower than promised. Technicians worked overtime, yet backlogs grew. Some dealers resorted to parking unfinished vehicles off-site because their lots had run out of space. Loaner cars vanished within days, forcing many customers to find their own transportation while still paying monthly for trucks they couldn't drive. The strain began to erode community relationships that had taken decades to build. In smaller towns, dealerships weren't just businesses, they were local institutions. Salespeople attended the same churches, sponsored little league teams, and relied on word-of-mouth reputation. Now those same dealers found themselves apologizing to neighbors they had known for years. Trust, once the bedrock of small-town commerce, cracked under the weight of endless delays and unanswered questions. Behind closed doors, dealership owners pleaded with Ford for clearer communication and faster parts distribution. Many felt that corporate headquarters underestimated how visible the crisis had become at the grassroots level. National headlines could fade, local outrage could not. By the end of that year, even the most loyal dealerships admitted privately that the brand's aura of invincibility was gone. The F-150 was still America's top-selling truck, but the culture surrounding it had changed. Confidence had evaporated, replaced by quiet exhaustion on both sides of the service counter. The next arena for Ford's fight would no longer be mechanical or customer service, it would be legal. When corporate statements failed to calm public anger, the issue moved into courtrooms and eventually Congress. Class action lawsuits multiplied across several states, each alleging that Ford sold vehicles with known defects while delaying adequate recalls. Plaintiffs' attorneys framed it as a breach of consumer trust, a David versus Goliath battle pitting ordinary families against one of America's automotive giants. Inside packed courtrooms, testimony from owners painted a grim picture: trucks stalling on highways, fires erupting beneath hoods, months of waiting for repairs that never came. Ford's lawyers countered with evidence of ongoing recalls, warranty extensions, and compliance with federal safety regulations. But the central question persisted: did the company act fast enough once warning signs appeared? Regulators were asking the same thing. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration intensified its scrutiny, launching formal probes into engine stall and fire risk incidents. Congressional committees requested internal communications to determine whether executives had delayed disclosures to protect quarterly performance. Television audiences soon watched hearings where senators held up scorched pistons and questioned why the built-tough promise had failed on the road. For Ford's leadership, these moments were a public relations nightmare. Every statement had to balance transparency with legal caution. Admitting too much risked liability, saying too little risked further backlash. Investors grew uneasy, and financial analysts began factoring potential settlements and penalties into forecasts. The company's share price wavered as market confidence ebbed. Beyond Ford, the proceedings signaled a larger reckoning for the entire automotive industry. Regulators began tightening expectations around defect reporting timelines and supplier accountability. Automakers realized that in an era of instant digital communication, delays in disclosure could no longer hide behind bureaucracy. For affected families, however, the fight was more personal than political. They wanted their trucks fixed, their money refunded, and their safety guaranteed. For many, compensation could never fully restore what was lost: trust in a brand that had defined American reliability for generations. By the time hearings concluded, one truth had become undeniable. Ford's greatest challenge was no longer technical, it was moral. The next sections of this story would show how the crisis rippled into investor confidence, the broader economy, and even Ford's future in electric mobility. When Ford's trucks began failing on highways and in driveways, the mechanical crisis quickly became a financial one, not just for families, but for the company itself. Wall Street, long accustomed to treating Ford as a stable, conservative investment, suddenly saw volatility where there had once been predictability. Every new recall announcement triggered small tremors in the stock market, and every lawsuit filing fed investor anxiety. Analysts began recalculating risk. Warranty liabilities and recall costs were no longer isolated expenses. They were systemic indicators of management's grip on quality. Reports circulated, estimating hundreds of millions in potential repair costs and settlements. Shareholders started asking sharper questions. How could Ford's most profitable product line, the F-150, turn from a revenue engine into a financial liability? Institutional investors, the lifeblood of market confidence, began hedging their exposure. Some pension funds quietly trimmed their holdings. Hedge funds shorted the stock, betting that the wave of recalls and lawsuits would drag on earnings longer than Ford anticipated. For the first time in years, analysts shifted their tone from buy to hold, citing persistent quality issues as a structural risk, not a temporary hiccup. The economic shock spread beyond the company's headquarters. Suppliers, especially those tied to engine components and assembly plants, faced cascading uncertainty. When Ford slowed production to investigate defects or retool lines, smaller subcontractors lost contracts and workers faced temporary layoffs. What began as a materials failure inside a cylinder head rippled outward to affect entire communities that depended on Ford's manufacturing ecosystem. Inside the company, morale faltered. Employees worried about potential cost-cutting measures as management scrambled to reassure investors that the brand's long-term vision remained intact. Executives emphasized the transition to electric vehicles and future technologies as proof that Ford was evolving, not collapsing. But even there, unease lingered. If oversight had faltered in traditional combustion engines, technologies the company had perfected over a century, what might happen in a field as new and complex as battery-driven vehicles? By mid-year, Ford's leadership faced a dual crisis: rebuilding its trucks and rebuilding investor confidence. The numbers on a balance sheet told one story, but the real narrative was emotional. Trust had become Ford's most fragile asset, and unlike steel or aluminum, trust couldn't be welded back together in a factory. It had to be earned slowly, publicly, and consistently. The Ford F-150's unraveling is more than a story about broken engines or malfunctioning parts. It's a modern parable about how reputation, once taken for granted, can be lost faster than any recall can repair it. For decades, Built Tough was shorthand for resilience, craftsmanship, and American dependability. But toughness, as this crisis revealed, is not found in marketing slogans or polished commercials. It's measured by integrity, accountability, and the willingness to confront failure head-on. Ford now faces the long, difficult road of rebuilding faith. The recalls will eventually conclude, the lawsuits will settle, and production lines will resume their rhythm. Yet the deeper repair, the moral and emotional one, will take far longer. Every customer who felt unheard, every dealer who faced angry owners, and every investor who watched confidence slip away represents a piece of that fractured bond. Repairing it will require more than new engineering standards. It will demand transparency, humility, and consistent proof that lessons have truly been learned. The company's leadership has already signaled a renewed focus on quality, announcing new inspection protocols and supplier accountability systems. These measures matter, but they must translate into results visible to consumers: fewer breakdowns, more reliability, and open communication when things go wrong. The F-150 may yet reclaim its place as America's most trusted truck, but that redemption won't come from nostalgia. It will come from performance that once again earns belief rather than assumes it. For drivers, the takeaway reaches beyond a single brand. The Ford F-150's crisis is a reminder of how interconnected modern life has become. A defect in one factory can ripple through households, markets, and industries. It reminds consumers to look beyond promises and demand proof. It reminds corporations that progress without responsibility is hollow. In the end, toughness is not about how much weight a truck can pull. It's about how a company shoulders the weight of its own mistakes. The story of the F-150 isn't finished, but its legacy will now depend on whether Ford can rebuild not just engines, but trust itself. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.